Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. We're here today with special guest, Daryl Dittmer, who's here to share with us his new books, When I Stop Fighting and When You Stop Fighting. What if a shift in perspective could unlock new possibilities in your life? Would you want to take it? Well, today's guest is here to share with us just that. After a humble and often tumultuous beginning, Daryl Dittmer has dedicated nearly 40 years to personal growth and self-improvement. Raised in a blue-collar family, a strong work ethic was instilled in him from an early age, and his first job as a farmhand, earning him just $1.50 per hour, taught him the immense value of hard work and long days. Over the years, he has built an impressive and varied career, working as a carpenter, sales professional, business owner, builder, landlord, real estate investor, and consultant, and now adding author to that list. Grateful for the mentors who have guided him throughout his journey, he is passionate about paying forward the wisdom and support he once received, considering it an honor to share his experiences with others. Having owned multiple businesses, he has enjoyed the freedom to retire on his own terms since the age of 48, now focusing on writing and sharing his story as a way of giving back. So welcome to the show, Daryl Dittmer.
Thanks so much, Marianne. I appreciate you having me on.
Well, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about your books. What inspired you to write these?
Well, I became sober actually over 40 years ago now. Have been in addiction recovery for over 40 years. And it's funny, my wife, I was relaying one of my stories to her about 20 years ago, and she didn't know me way back when. And she said, that's not you, Daryl. That just doesn't seem like you. And I said, well, it's not me anymore. And then I said, remind me to write a book someday. So that was the advent of wanting to share my message.
So let's talk about your first book, When I Stop Fighting. What is that about? If you can give us a little bit about that.
Sure, it's a memoir, but it's a memoir with a message, and it's about overcoming addictions, overcoming dysfunction, taking risks. It's my story about losing, winning, vulnerability, moving my life toward authenticity. And I think the most important thing about it for me is it's not a you should or an advice book. It's a story about getting knocked down many times, getting up many times, and the lessons I learned. It's more of a guide for life.
Well, they say that you can't take somebody where you haven't been, and your books really show how to navigate into a new life. And I found that to be so empowering.
Thank you. And I don't think there's anything more important than our stories and how we impart those stories. I think about what I have potentially to give to this world and to give to people that I care about and to give to people that I've never met. And the most important thing for me is to tell my story because it may just help someone else.
So, 40 years sobriety, congratulations. That is quite an accomplishment. And
Thank you.
my goodness. And for those folks that are maybe struggling to overcome an addiction, what advice would you give to them?
One of the most important pieces of advice I believe I ever received, and it has to do with the titles of my books, is it was easy for me the way I grew up and the way I lived my life and the way I was raised to live my life to fight and to wrestle and to struggle and to always be sort of in that match between me and the world or me and other people or me and alcohol or drugs. And ultimately that fight was between me and myself. And one of my great mentors said to me long ago, he said, Daryl, when you stop fighting, the fighting stops. And I've been carrying that with me ever since.
I think for some people that sounds extremely profound. It's like, okay, if you've been fighting your whole life, then How do you get to a place where you stop fighting?
That's the trick, right? It took me a long time to understand that the true fight was with me and the things that I do and the things that I choose, whether it's who I choose to be around, what I choose to do with my time, how I choose to move my life forward or not. All of these things are things that I can choose. Quieting my mind is something that's very important to me now. I do breath work, which is very important to me now. There are a number of different things we can do that help us to slow down, or in many cases stop that fight that we can have a tendency to have with ourselves our entire lives.
So, how did you come to understand the importance of personal responsibility in your transformation?
That was something that when I first got involved in getting clean and sober, they told me I needed to be responsible. And it was the last thing in the world that I had been doing. And it was the last thing in the world that I wanted to do. Um, but I found that responsibility actually, for me, became synonymous with freedom. The more that I took responsibility for my life and the things that I allow myself to either do or not do, equates to freedom for me because I'm choosing the life that I want and I'm not allowing all of the outside circumstances and people and sometimes not great influences to determine the direction in which I go.
Well, I know this book really dives into this very raw and honest writing of just what you've been through. What I found interesting, I feel like your book is more for also people who are just dealing with life, not just people going through some type of an addiction recovery.
Absolutely true. And I think I'm appreciative that you brought that up, Marianne, because life can be difficult for many reasons, and it doesn't have to necessarily do with addiction. Sometimes it is addiction, and sometimes it's addictions other than, um, alcohol or drugs. It can be things that we've attached ourselves to. So it's important to understand, it's important to take a look at where we are and what's happening in our life. What are we doing to contribute to maybe some of the misery? Are we doing some of the wrong things? Are we hanging out with people who don't support us in being our best? Those types of things are all extremely important and don't necessarily have anything to do with addiction.
In many ways, I felt it was, your books are for those folks that never received like really good instruction on how to live life or how to move forward in life. It really kind of addressing many life lessons that we all pretty much will face.
Absolutely. It's it's it, we all have different stories to an extent, but I find that where we all connect and where the playing field gets very leveled is we all have the same emotions. We all can feel anxieties and fears and trepidation and joy and peace, and we all can feel the gamut of emotions, and that's really where the rubber hits the road. So it's not necessarily what we're doing on the outside, it's what's happening on the inside. And that's where I find that I can have the issues, but I also know that that's the place where I find the healing.
What would you say was one of your biggest internal struggles you faced while on your journey to change?
I grew up with we'll call it the Protestant work ethic, and that's kind of what the way I was raised. My dad was a mechanic. My mom took care of us kids. My dad worked a lot, and I think my mom had the harder job based on based on how things happened with us. But it was a journey where I ended up with a hole in the middle of me, and I say that proverbially, because it wasn't fulfilled. It wasn't filled. I wasn't fulfilled with anything that made me feel good about me and about my life and about living. Everything seemed like it had to do with, if you're not accomplishing something, if you don't have your head down and, working like crazy, or if you don't do well in sports, or you don't get good grades and all that kind of thing, you're not worth it. And that's kind of what I carried with me. And that was difficult for me to overcome, because I had to find a way to fill that hole without just accomplishing things.
So, what did you end up filling that hole with? Because I think a lot of times people would, and correct me if I'm wrong, might get back into some type of, kind of addictive behavior, maybe filling it with too much work or, whatever the case may be.
I went through all of those iterations of life as I began the healing process, and I did too much work, and I was addicted to nicotine, cigarettes, chewing tobacco, a number of different things, and those are all things that, it's interesting. I had another mentor say to me, which was probably the second most important thing that I learned. We've all heard of first things first, right? But this mentor said, Daryl, first things first, and the rest will be added on. And it had to do with taking care of myself. And I look at it like I have to take care of myself in all four aspects of me, which are body, mind, heart, and soul. I need to eat right. I need to fill myself with the proper, books and reading and study, and challenging my mind. I have to ensure that I do the right things for myself. And when I say that, the heart part is, sometimes I have to say goodbye to people who aren't the best for me or for my life. And a lot of times it's difficult because those people can be family members. So, and as far as my soul goes, I quiet myself. Like I mentioned, I do the breath work. It's a very holistic way of approaching life. And I've found that because I have the sort of personality that can be addicted, and that can be, take things to the extreme, I have to learn to quiet that, and I have to pay attention to all those parts of me in order to do that.
I'm pretty sure there are a lot of people listening right now that can relate to that in one form or another. The overachievers, the people pleasers. I mean, the list goes on and on and on.
I agree. And I still, I semi-retired when I was 48. And I'm not 48 anymore. I'm a little ways past that, but uh, it was, I'm always looking for something to do. And between the books and podcasting and that sort of thing, I believe there are definitely healthy ways to move ourselves forward, and we can be doing the same activity in a healthy way or an unhealthy way. And achieving that balance for ourselves, I think, is very important in taking care of our bodies, minds, hearts, and souls.
So let's talk about your second book, When You Stop Fighting. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Sure. That book, When You Stop Fighting, is about what we want from this lifetime. And we've touched on a little bit of that, but I believe we all have a wish list, and that probably includes things like happiness and contentment, great relationships, peace of mind, meaning or purpose, and maybe financial security. And the question is, how do we get there? And another question is, what is stopping us from getting to our wish list? And so once we know what's stopping us, how do we move forward? What does that journey look like? What do we do when we fail or when we falter? How do we get to a life beyond our wildest dreams? inside and outside us. And all of those things are in When You Stop Fighting, my second book.
Now, is your second book more, because we know it's a follow-up, is this more focused on the reader's journey?
I use stories in both books, and I use stories based on my experience. But yes, it is more focused on the reader's journey. It's more focused on discovering ourselves and discovering where we are and asking ourselves what we want and where we'd like to be. And it was my second book just sort of poured out of me because I wanted to include the reader in getting there and in feeling better and improving and moving toward a more authentic life.
What are some common fears people face when trying to change, and how can they overcome those?
It's difficult, and I think the most important thing to understand going in is that it's not easy, and there are times when it's going to be tough, and I think we all, innately have sometimes a fear of difficulty or of having to try so hard to do something and getting up over and over and I, those are things that I have still. Sometimes I'm like, oh man, I this is difficult. And but that's probably the biggest thing that we have to overcome is just saying to ourselves, and what I had to say to myself was, and then the interesting is over time it just becomes an innate sort of knowing that regardless of whether it's difficult or easy, or whether I win or whether I lose, they're just stepping stones. Everything we're doing and everything that happens is just a stepping stone on the journey. And I don't have to create in me whether it's bad or whether it's good or whether it's difficult or whether it's easy. It's just a stepping stone and it's just taking me where I want to go.
What advice would you give someone who's looking to redesign their life for the better?
I would say the most important thing in starting that is to ask yourself specifically what you want. And then very early on, I would say, many, many years ago, I had to take apart my life and I had to look at it and I had to say, all right, I liken it to putting everything on a table, all of my stuff on a table. Okay, here's Daryl. Here's all the different pieces that go into Daryl. What's working and what's not working? And looking at everything. And I grew up in a religious household. I grew up in, a household where I was needed to be tough and I had to look at all those things and discard some of the things that I didn't want. I liken it to taking out the garbage. I have to look and then I have to discard some things and then I have to welcome new and better things into my life.
I understand, aside from both of your great books, you also have a podcast. Can you share that with us?
I do. It's called When I Stop Fighting, the podcast, and it brings on as many stories of people's journeys as I can find, and doctors and lawyers and psychologists and authors and regular people, like me. Um, so, and I'm a big believer that stories are what we have to give, and we talk about the internal fights, and we talk about the struggles, and we talk about how we define recovery and how we get better and how we move forward. I would say it's probably, 40 to 50% people in recovery and 40 to 50% people who are outside of quote unquote recovery and they're just living their lives and they've gone through some difficult things.
Well, Daryl, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your books?
The best place to connect with me is on my website, which is daryldittmer.com, and that's DARYLDITTMER.com. Both of my books are available on Amazon, and the podcast is available you can listen to it on my website, each new episode and the older episodes, and also available on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, etc.
Well, Daryl, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you, Marianne. Appreciate you having me.
Well, thank you, Daryl. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your two books, When I Stop Fighting and When You Stop Fighting. Make sure to visit Daryl's website at daryldittmer.com for more information on his work and to connect with him. Both books are available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and everywhere books are sold. And remember, support our indie bookstores. If you don't see it on the shelf, just ask for them to order it. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.